I'm Peter Adkison, and I'm here with that guy. We are here to take a deeper delve into Chaldea lore. We co-direct the Chaldea series, and we love talking about Chaldea. So here we are to talk about Chaldea some more. And today we are going to talk about the Great Sea. I love this topic a lot, just like I loved all of our topics, but I especially love the Great Sea because it's a bit my baby in the sense that I spend a lot. I kind of am the one that said, "Hey, Steve, we should do this idea," and like usual, Steve's like, okay. No, I really like it, but I'm just going to give you kind of a stone face a little bit for a while.
Well,
right?
okay, so right? Yes, okay. Well, as soon as somebody describes something, it's usually Peter. I have to art direct what it looks like.
That's true.
Okay. I like the way things look. And also, I'm a very engineered type of mind. I want to know that these things go together. And when we get done, we have an engine, something that functions. So anyway, we started laying out the designs for the Great Sea, and I failed like 4 times or something. It was not good.
Reminds me of our conversation about the Pearl universe, right? Like, no, that's...
Well, this big, wide metaphysical concept. It's like, okay.
I love weird metaphysical shit. I mean, I love like singularity events in science fiction and magical constructs in fantasy and so on. So what is the idea of the Great Sea? First of all, what we're used to as humans. I wanted to do something different than the ocean and all the continents are floating in the ocean. I wanted something a little different. So the Great Sea is our ocean, but it doesn't act like a normal ocean. When you travel the Great Sea, in other words, when you leave land and go out into the ocean, you are now on a mythic journey, not a scientific journey. Like in our world, we have the latitudinal lines and longitudinal lines. Did I get those in the right order? I think I did, actually. Wow, that was pure coincidence. And sextants and everything's, once we understood humans that this was on a sphere, you could map it out.
Magnetic north.
You can magnetic north and all stuff like that. Very scientific. Chaldea, it's not that way. The first thing to understand about the Great Sea in Chaldea is that the continents are drifting on the Great Sea, but there is no sense of direction on the Great Sea. So if you sail from, say, Saratov to Esh, you leave the harbor of Saratov, and okay, you always kind of go the same direction just to escape the continent and get out into the Great Sea. But then you start following the Inumians, and maybe one time you kind of veered what felt like you were going to the right, but were you really? No. You were just sailing and following mythical signs and astrological signs and folk tales of how you might make this journey to your destination.
I have a very interesting way of thinking about this. So I used to love this show called Mythbusters. And then one of the myths they wanted to bust was like, if you close your eyes or you're blindfolded, can you walk in a straight line? So what they did was they had the 2 guys and they were blindfolded and they walked in a straight line, what they thought was a straight line across a field. And they had like a camera above shooting down. And as it turned out, they mapped their path and they were just doing this. It was just, and that's how traveling the Great Sea works. You go out and you're like, I'm trying to get to Ash. I have no idea how to get there.
Because there is no relationship on a larger XY grid or spherical grid between where the continents are located, we can't show you a map of Chaldea, which really frustrates Steve. He does not like this at all. Like he wants really badly to show you a map of Chaldea. No, we can't do it because as soon as if we put the maps all out on a big piece of paper, then that's going to imply a relationship of where the continents are relative to each other. And that idea is in conflict with the fundamental nature of the Great Sea.
So I said, okay, so there's going to be somebody, there's going to be a cartographer, somebody in Chaldea, a human, who's going to say, well, what does Chaldea look like? And there's not going to be Peter Adkison there to explain to everybody on the planet at all times that these things are not related. It says some cartographer at some point is going to lay out the continents and he's going to do it, right? And they're not going to be relationally proper, but he's going to do it. So that person did it. It ended up becoming an art project, and then it ended up becoming a KI article where all the scientific minds is probably not the correct term, the mythical minded people go, that's not right. You should not do a map where all the continents are together.
Well, I think scientific minds is correct, actually. The scientific minds got together and made this map. But in Chaldea, a magical world, the scientific minds, those people have as much credibility as in our worlds, in the real world, the seers and astrologers have. Which not to denigrate people who believe in astrology. I apologize, but I think most of us don't. So there you go.
If you take a look at our prologue cover art, it's a wonderful piece of art, and it's just a big flat ocean, and there's just one. We only depict one continent floated there. Who knows where the other ones are at, but they're nowhere near each other.
Right. And so this has created interesting questions for us along the way that we've had to resolve. Like, okay, if all the continents are floating on the Great Sea and they don't have any physical relationship to each other, what does it mean the sun rises in the, does the sun always rise in the east and set in the west? Does it do that for all the continents? Are they always oriented in the same way? And so, well, relative to sun and sun's also mythological journey across the daytime sky, yes, sun always appears to arrive on, what is it, east or west? I forgot all of a sudden. It comes up in, I always have to remember this old cowboy song.
It comes up in the east and goes down in the west.
Yeah. Yes, it comes up in the east and goes down in the west. Yes. The Legend of the Strawberry Roan. That was it. So the sun comes up in the east and goes down in the west. So east, west, north, south has no meaning out on the Great Sea, but on each continent, it means something, and it means the coordinates that you would expect based on the journey of the sun, during the day, which starts in the east and goes to the west. Also, Chaldeans know that this happens at precisely the same time on all the continents.
Because they're all running on the exact same clock.
Right. So there's no like time zones. So they know this. Okay. But because of telepathy and other magical means, they're like, hey, is it dark there? No, same. Yep, sun just came up. Yep, sun just arrived over here too. Interesting. You can imagine all the fears trying to figure this out for a while. Yeah. So clearly there is a difference in the way the water is working, if you will. Once you're out in the Great Sea, you're part of this mythic sort of journey. So where does the Great Sea start? It starts some distance from the continent. So the continent has coastal waters, like in the real world, we talk about the coastal waters of a continent. How big is how far out do those extend? So if you visualize a continent as floating in the ocean, then there's a part of it that's submerged. And so it's just however far that submerged piece of rock, if you will. The fact that it's a mythic sea, and it doesn't really matter for this particular part of the discussion. And so it might be just 5 or 10 miles. It might be 100 miles. It will vary depending on sort of the shape of this larger rock. Or sometimes we also have what we call an island group, which will be a group of islands, a collection of islands that are in the Great Sea that are close enough that they behave more like a continent. And there is
if you think of them as an iceberg, right? There's a huge piece under there, and the continental shelf goes out, but it's still underwater. And there's still all the underwater activity and coral reefs and things of that nature. So if you have an island archipelago, there's little islands sticking up, but underneath they're all connected by it.
Right. Exactly. That's exactly the way it works for us. So there is the idea that at some point there is a shelf, and sometimes you can see it and sometimes you can't. Sometimes you might sail out of a harbor, sail for like 30, 40 miles, and you might come to the spot where there's more disruption in the current. There's some weird eddies, and so part of being a successful navigator of the Great Sea is to know how best to approach these various harbors and ingress and egress.
The significant portion of shipping is within line of sight of land, because it takes balls to sell out and lose sight of land. At that point, you better know what you're doing. You better be an astrological navigator. That's the person you want to be. And because once you leave sight of land, if you don't know what you're doing, you may never see land again.
That's exactly right. It's very, very scary. So the between cities or in the same continent, usually the trade between those cities will be, if they're port cities, will be along the coast because it's just safer. Now, there are continents with places where that's not true, where there's huge bad storms or tides or whatever sort of dangers that exist out there. But for the most part, people will do coastal trading up coast or down coast. There are also some interesting areas of the Great Sea that are fantastical in some sort of way, like say the Chaldea. There's a Chaldea is imagine a huge whirlpool, if you will, only like miles and miles across on an oceanic level, like the rain in Saturn or something like, okay, maybe not that big. The Chaldea is this whirlpool where water is going in a circle, and if you go down in there, it actually leads to another plane, and gravity changes in that journey, and you can come out the other end and come up out of the Chaldea onto another plane of another Great Sea. It's not like a mirror universe, but it's mirror conceptually of Chaldea, but different continents and different places, different people and stuff like that.
Yeah, the thing about the Chaldea, which is crazy, sure, it's a big whirlpool and you could take your boat and sail down it if you so desire. It's actually pulling land masses towards it like a titanic black hole of water, but in a very slow, not like light speed or anything, but they pulls in these islands, and these islands start to like rotate around it. And it's so large in the rotation, they could rotate for 30 years or 50 years or some amount of time. And so people live on the.
Yes. These islands so the Chaldea is surrounded by islands. It's called the Panorindi Isles. And from when an island first gets sucked into that vortex, it's probably going to exist for a couple of centuries before it will have gone all the way around this thing and continued into closer and closer and closer to the vortex, and then eventually gets sucked away.
They have quite the little civilization there where people are living on the islands, and then it's like, oh, probably in the next 10 years this island might disappear, and they just get up and move to the next island, right? And then eventually everybody just watches it go off. And the thing is that island actually doesn't get destroyed. Well, it's like being in the eye of a hurricane or some crazy thing. It'll come out the other side, and who knows what happens over there. I just don't think you want to ride that island through. Although I'm sure somebody has.
People have survived the trip. You can travel to there, but a typical boat is going to get torn apart. So it's usually magical transport of some sort, or magical.
People seen dragons flying.
Yeah, dragons. That's always a good one. And so as these islands get sucked into the main vortex, it's like a place with just like 200-mile-an-hour winds all the time. Like nobody can survive it at that point, and all the vegetation gets blown off, and by the time the island is sucked down into it, it's just a rock.
Well, it's like permanently living on the eye wall of a hurricane. That wall is just maximum air pressure anyway. So, by the way, this particular map is on our website. Go check it out. Maybe we'll show it to you here too. But anyway, it's there. Blow it up and take a look. See. Some people is like, why would anybody want to live there? There's got to be some advantage to living there.
Yeah. You came up with the idea for the lower sea. Why don't you talk about that, Steve?
So the lower sea it's actually a continent, but it's like a sunken continent. And so no piece of land is actually sticking up. But there's some sort of weird gravitational thing happening where it's below the ocean level, and there's basically a hollow, a pocket. And the thing that's bad about that, and of course this thing, like all the other continents, is moving around, who knows how. So it's like a big water slide on the edges down into this thing, 200-300 feet. So ships could get sucked down into the lower sea, and well, I mean, there's no motorboats or anything. So unless you can fly your boat out of there or you can get out somehow, you're just not getting out. And so, yeah, it's sort of the sunken graveyard down there of ships that didn't survive. So yeah, that place is called the Lower Sea, and we actually show that in one of our stories.
Right. And let's see, there is the Dorsang Drift. The Dorsang Drift.
The funny thing is, the first time we ever heard this Dorsang Drift was actually during a role-playing game. Yeah, where we were trying to get to Esh. That's where we're trying to get to Esh. And we missed our navigation roll and got caught in the Dorsang Drift and ended up in Samaria, if I recall.
Yeah. Exactly.
At least we hit land. I mean, that was a good thing, but we just overshot. And because we were low-B navigators. And so that's when I learned about the Dorsang Drift.
Yeah, it was in a Burning Wheel game, a failed navigation roll in Burning Wheel, and came up with the Dorsang Drift. But basically, it's a place of the Great Sea that once you get sucked into it, it spits you out in some unknown way.
The problem, think about it as a huge, almost like a huge, like mystical current. And it happens to actually go near Esh. So if you don't really know what you're doing, you don't know how to avoid it, you get hit in that and you just get slung.
Yeah, it's like a slingshot effect.
Yeah. Whoops. It's like a slingshot around the sun effect, like Star Trek going back in time, whoops. Yep. Thought we were going to Dorsang, hit the city of Esh. No, we missed it. Crap. Now we got to take 3 extra weeks to come back around and try it again. It's like a missed landing where anybody haven't done that before and come back around. Yeah, not good.
That's right.
And we were ridiculed endlessly as players.
Yeah, it was fun. And of course, we have to have an interest. I mean, given how all the stuff going on with the Great Sea, there's got to be a kingdom, some sort of political faction that likes to take advantage of the unique circumstances of that, and thus our version of Tritons and mermaids or merfolk, mermen. Tritons, this is one race, and inspired, of course, by Greek mythology. And the kingdom of the Tritons is called Tritonus, and they have a lot of power. They are like a lot of piracy that happens on the Great Sea. The pirates, woohoo, it's mostly backed by the Tritons in Chaldea, and Tritonus is a huge pirate sort of haven, but not very nice.
No. 2 things. First thing is, the Tritons in Chaldea are not nice. They're not like cute, cuddly Disney mermaids or anything. No. These are the the typical Greek thing where the siren will lure sailors off the side of the boat and eat them.
Yeah, that's a lot more on brand for Chaldea than the cute little Disney mermaid. Right.
Well, and so the other thing is that the Triton Empire is quite powerful. When Cordova was in power and he was controlling Chaldea as the emperor, he kept them in check.
Right.
And anybody who's following our story knows that Cordova's dead. Well, so when the cat is away, the mice will play.
What happens to an empire when the god emperor dies? Well, we keep.
What happens to the Great Sea?
But we would not be doing our job if we didn't find more and more interesting ways to answer that question. And another one that we propose today is the Tritons and piracy. So travel on the Great Sea is going to become dangerous in the Chaldea storyline.
As if it wasn't dangerous enough.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about navigation. We mentioned that it happens through astrology and folklore and stuff. So one of the key elements, of course, is the Enumians and knowing where the Enumians haunt. We have another video in our series of Deeper Delve called about the Enumians, where we talk more about the Enumians. But one of the things we cover there is this idea that the Enumians have haunts, places in Chaldea where they like to hang out above that place, like Beast above Hesse, Mother above the Garnon River, and so on and so forth. So one way to navigate the Great Sea is understand who's the Enumian that likes to haunt the place I'm going to. And then what relationships in the social fabric of Enumians and how they all interact with each other, what relationships does that Enumian have? Either good or bad. If it's a good relationship, then maybe those two Enumians will be in proximity to each other because they like each other. Or if it's bad, maybe the hunter is chasing Beast. So if you want to go to Hesse and you know that Beast likes to haunt there, if you see the hunter in the sky and you know the hunter pursues Beast, you can follow Hunter. Maybe that'll take you to Beast and that'll get you to where you want to go.
In one of our stories, our heroes are navigating the Great Sea and they're trying to get to a particular location. And the navigator says, well, we're going to summon Jackrabbit because we know that Jackrabbit will get us to the Panarendi is where we want to go. So people are like, do we have to summon the Jackrabbit? Well, the Jackrabbit's chaotic and just basically zigzags and it's crazy and it's hard to follow, but we'll allow you to follow. If you get too close, you'll scare him away. You get too far away, you'll lose him. It is a way of navigating. It's one way of lots of ways of. So if you're a good navigator and you're a good astrologer and you understand how all these Enumians function and work, for whatever particular case, you're like, if I'm here, I want to go there. I want to, this links up to that one. And they're all gambles. And so, yeah, you can actually summon Enumians or let them be revealed and then try to follow them.
So when we were trying to figure out this idea of navigating the Great Sea, one of the questions was, well, what's the North Star? Like, it's great to have like this idea of the North Star. What is the easy track for astrology 101? So we came up with the idea that the world serpent is massive, right?
Big.
The world serpent's huge, right? Well,
it's hard to miss.
It's hard to miss. The world serpent is the easiest Enumian to spot in the sky, other than sun and moon, of course, which are always around. But of the noble Enumians, the world serpent is the easiest one to find. It is almost always on the horizon. You can almost always see it. So the astrology 101 is to follow the world serpent, and it will get you to a city called Port Facility in the kingdom of Muramaki. And so you can, in almost any situation in the Great Sea, you could do that. But you may not want to.
If you're in dire straits. So if you're a newbie, you're like, okay, it's my first time out. I'm going to go there. Mainly, you don't want to do that. Why is that?
Well, the problem is because imagine if you were an elder dragon and you like money, which elder dragons do. You could think, hey, I am just going to take over this kingdom, Muramaki, and control it. And all the ships get lost at sea, they're all going to come to my harbor, and I will charge them exorbitant amounts of tariffs to leave. And yeah, that's what happens. So there is an elder dragon named Theocrid. I mean, he's commonly known to live in Muramaki. And if you go there without, because you got lost at sea, don't have the appropriate commerce sorts of credentials to be there, it might cost you almost as much as the ship cost to begin with, just to be able to get the ship back.
Well, there's lots of ships for sale there. It's a good place to go to try to buy ships because people have to sell them to get out of hock. Plus, there's a bunch of sailors and ex-captains and navigators sort of running around the port trying to get on the next ship out.
Yeah.
It's really not a nice place. For that reason, sailors and shipping, that's not a good place to go.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an unfortunate turn of events when it happens. So.
Yeah, there's another thing about navigation that it took me a while. Peter had always beaten me up on this one. So we were writing a story, and a character was like traveling from here to there, and I said, "How many leagues was it?" It's 300 leagues. Okay, it's 300 leagues from this city to this city, across land. And he's like, "Well, it'd be just you could travel 300 leagues in this amount of time, or you could jump on boat and just go to the Great Sea and just come in on the other side." Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Because there's this weird thing where like you could travel faster sometimes through the Great Sea, even though you would think on the map, it's like, well, no, it's not that far apart. Yeah, it's actually,
Yeah. It's sort of like, we're trying to think like, well, if you go east is one way to get someplace. If you go west, then you have to go clear all the way around the world. Sure, you'll get there eventually if you go all the way around the world, but that's going to take a lot longer. Yeah, well, actually, on a given continent, two cities on the same continent, about the same amount of time to get from one of these cities to the other city as an entirely different continent. And by the way, sort of the rule of thumb on travel for ocean navigation for experienced astrologers who know what they're doing is 3 to 5 weeks. That's about how long it takes typically to go from one city to another city. And the cities happen to be where there are haunts. You can't really sail. It's hard. It's difficult to sail to a city that doesn't have an Endymion that haunts it.
well, yeah. So typically you'll travel to another major city and then you'll travel on the coast. So you go to Blue Moon is the major city in Samaria, but then you might go from Blue Moon to Agrian Yard or some other place.
On the topic of the Great Sea, are ships of Chaldea sort of the ones that are contemporary to where we're at when you design a fantasy world, you kind of have to think, what's the level of technology of various things? So for Chaldea, the age of caravels and cogs, if you want to think of real world history of ships that sailed the real world ocean, initially in some of the earliest days of Columbus, that sort of thing. Caravels and cogs. And a ship, one key difference about a ship in Chaldea that is sailing the Great Sea is that the navigators are astrologers. Like that is like an official position in the Navy, right? It's like, so that's kind of like the idea that, a character with a naval rank and a military, it's an astrologer.
So yeah, there's a captain and then there's the navigator. For sure, on a major
right
professional
vessel. A smaller boat that's barely able to go on a trip across the ocean. The navigator and the captain might be the same person.
Right, and there's also like I think the coastal travel is it's all typically by a lot of times it'll be by oar, and sail, but a lot of rowing going on.
Yeah, your typical coastal ships of Chaldea are like the biremes and the triremes and the quadremes, and those ships are typically capable of going up the major rivers and down them. They have they typically have oars and sails, so you can use the sails when you have a good wind, but you can row the boat and position it well into harbors and up rivers.
It's kind of funny, we're always talking about, the world of Chaldea. In some ways, when I think of the world of Chaldea, I think of the Great Sea. I mean, to me, the Great Sea is Chaldea. It's like Chaldea is the Great Sea. There just happens to be some land there. Chaldea is the Great Sea. I don't know if that's actually technically exactly the way it is. That's just in my mind. I'm always thinking of Chaldea as this amazing Great Sea that comes to mind first, because it influences everything. It has a lot of influence on our stories and events and pretty much everything.
Yeah, and that was, I like the idea that there's lots of continents and lots of kingdoms. I love the diversity of human life, and then with different races. I also like the in ethnicities. I like how that diversity grows bigger and more complex and ultimately more fantastical in a fantasy setting. And put a big ocean right in the middle of all that, call it the Great Sea, and require astrology to get from A to B. Makes it a lot of fun.
Putting barriers to entry between them, the Great Sea. I mean, it's probably important to note that if you go to our website, we have all the maps, and they're beautifully rendered, and they're all there in detail. We love our maps. We love our maps. But because there's a Great Sea, that's not every piece of land that exists in all of Chaldea. There might be more out there undiscovered yet.
Oh yeah, for sure. There are islands, small islands, or big islands, small continents that we haven't shown you the map for. Maybe because we haven't invented them yet, but they're out there.
Well, I can think of one really truly titanic one. We just decided, for now, let's just not even bring that one out. So.
Yeah. Well, I think the idea of an island that is by itself out on the Great Sea could be a particularly interesting place for some crazy monster to live, like a titan or a giant or a
really, really big dragon that never stops growing.
Yeah, big dragon. Yeah, exactly. All right, well, that is our coverage of the Great Sea. I hope you like our take on a ocean, if you will, for a magical world. I think it feels fantastical. It feels intriguing, and we're very happy with it.
Well, if you like the idea of the Great Sea and you love maps, you got to check out our maps, our atlas part on our website. The maps are amazing. We love maps. We just spent a lot of time on these maps. Cartographer at one point, this is the biggest map I've ever made. So there's lots of cool details in there. Have fun with it. It's cool.
That's right. www.worldofchaldea.com. We got maps. We got our Chaldeapedia with all sorts of Chaldea lore. We have our Cardavan Informant articles. We have all of our Actoroke episodes. The credits.
Chaldea is just getting bigger and bigger.
Yeah. And by the time you see this, might be years from now. It's going to be crazy by then. So, all right. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it.
Ciao.